Good afternoon. My name is Kim Clyett Long, and I'm a proud member of the board of the Charleston Literary Festival. Let's take care of some housekeeping matters. First of all, and thankfully, this session is sponsored by the College of Charleston Alumni Association. Let's give them a hand. And I also want to remind everyone to please put your ringers on your phone in the off position. There will be a book signing following this presentation. This is a perfect opportunity to give gifts. The holidays are coming, so remember your gift list. I want to now introduce, this is my greatest delight today. Anyway, to introduce the participants in this conversation. This book examines how Mr. Dave Drake's pottery and poetry has inspired visual artists and poets who claim him as an artistic director. The first participant I'd like to introduce, and I think he's not a stranger to this audience, is Jonathan Green. Dr. Green is a contemporary American artist and painter known for his vibrant works that celebrate Gullah culture. He was born in Gardens Corner, South Carolina, raised in a Gullah community which preserved African heritage and traditions. His works often feature themes of family, community, and the natural environment, and are characterized by their bright, bold colors and strong sense of cultural identity. He has received numerous awards, and his art has been exhibited in major museums and galleries around the world. He is also an advocate for the arts and cultural preservation, making significant contributions to the education and promotion of art and heritage everywhere. Please stay tuned for the upcoming Jonathan Green Maritime Cultural Center hosted at the University of South Carolina, Beaufort. Let's now turn to Glenis Redmond, our poet today. Glenis is the first poet laureate for the city of Greenville, South Carolina. She's a poet, educator, and performer known for her dynamic verse and engaging presence. With roots in the South, her poetry weaves together personal narrative, cultural history, and a deep sense of spirituality. Redmond has been a mentor to young poets and a fierce advocate for the healing power of poetry, conducting workshops and readings across the United States. Her work has earned her fellowships and many awards. She has been featured at numerous festivals and on national radio programs. Glenis's passion is to bring poetry to people where they live, fostering an appreciation for the art form's ability to capture the human experience in words. The interlocutor for this conversation is Malika Pryor. She provides strategic direction for creating museum programs and community engagement events, including K through 12, school programs and curriculum, programming and partnerships that support the International African American Museum's faith-based initiatives, workshops, and engagements through the Center for Family History at local, regional, and national levels. Let's give them all a hand for this. Thank you.
So it's my turn now. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and for joining us. This is such an honor and pleasure to be in conversation. And I know that you all are going to begin. Glenis, I think you're going to be leading off this conversation. And so I just want to hand it over to you, starting with that thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be on the stage with Malika and Jonathan, and I'm going to do a few poems from the book. I did want to say this is a collaborative effort, Praise Songs for Dave the Potter, and I am sitting next to my mentor, Jonathan Green, and you'll hear throughout this conversation, it will be a thread, how much he means to me. And this book is about scholarship, it is about artwork, and poetry, and it's woven together. And I thought I would do two poems to start off with, if y'all are okay. They're in the book, one's in the book, one's not. And I really want to just talk a little bit about my relationship to Jonathan. We'll go back and talk about it a little bit deeper, but I gained my voice actually by looking at Jonathan Green's paintings. We bought the christening in Greenville at the museum as a group. And it was there I met Jonathan. And I was a counselor, a clinical 2 counselor at the time. And he didn't know it, but I had been diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And my doctor had said, you're not gonna die from it, but you're gonna sure wish you would have. And I said, well, what is it that I wanna do? If I'm gonna feel in pain every day of my life, what is it that I want to do? And I remembered poetry. There was a NPR special Bill Moyers had, Language of Life, remember that? He's also a guru of mine. And there was a poet on PBS, and I won't do the whole poem, but I was sitting there querying, what do I want to do with my life? And I heard this poet, and the end of her poem said, won't you come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. That was Lucille Clifton. And I said, oh, poetry, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna celebrate every day, and it's through poetry. And I met Jonathan right after that. He had come to Greenville, to the museum, and he looked at me and he said, why are you counseling? You're a poet. And it was like, he saw straight through me. And then when Jonathan gives you your marching orders, what do? You follow. And we would talk on the phone, and one day he called me and he said, Glenis, I need a 21-line poem for my calendar about home. And you all, I went and wrote 20-line poem. It was horrible. It was a horrible poem because I'm an Air Force brat. I didn't have a sense of place. And it wasn't until Jonathan pointed me in that direction and I saw a black and white photo of me and my mom in 1968 in Lawrence, South Carolina, and we're standing in front of a shack. And I saw that picture and I realized that's where I come from. And without Jonathan's prodding about home, I would have never figured it out. I woke up in tears one morning and I wrote this poem for my mother because my mother is my backbone. And that's the title of my first book, Backbone. And I'm leaning on her. She's in her Jackie Kennedy dress, looking all that. And I realized this is home. So if you do not mind, I'm gonna share that poem that came out of the horrible poem that I wrote for Jonathan. Are y'all all right with that? Okay. It's called Mama's Magic, and my mother is still alive and kicking and making her red velvet cakes in Piedmont, South Carolina. My mama is magic. Always was, always will be. There is one phrase that constantly bubbled from the lips of her 5 children. My mama can do it. We thought my mama knew everything. Believed she did as if she were born full-blown from the Encyclopedia Britannica. I could tell you stories how she transformed a rundown paint-pilled shack into a home. How she heated us with tin-tub baths from a kettle on the stove, put her over in there like an elixir. My mama is protection, like those quilts her mama used to make. She tucked us in what cut out history all around us, and we found we could walk anywhere in this world and not feel alone. My mama never whispered the shame of poverty in our ears. She taught us to dance to our own shadows. Pay no attention to those grand parties on the other side of the track. Make your own music, she say. As she walked and cleaned the sagging boards of that place, you'll get there. You'll get there, her broom seemed to say with every wisp. We were my mama's favorite recipe. She whipped us up with her big brown hands in a big brown bowl, supported by her big brown arms. We were homemade children, stitched together with homemade love. We didn't get everything we ever wanted, but we lacked for nothing. We looked at the stars in my mama's eyes, and they told us we owned the world. We walked like kings and queens, even on midnight trips to the outhouse. We were under her spell. My mama didn't study at no Harvard or Yale, but the things she learned you couldn't learn in no book, like how to make your life sing like sweet potato pie sweetness out of open window, how to make anybody feel at home, how at just the right moment be silent with those eyes, say, everything is gonna be all right, child. Everything is gonna be all right. How she tended to our sickness, how she raised our spirits, how she kept flowers living on our dilapidated porch in the midst of family chaos. My mama raised children like it was her business in life. Put us on her hip and kept on moving, keeping that house pine sol clean, yeah. My mama's magic always was, always will be. Her magic, how to stay steady and sure in this fast-paced world. Now when people see me with my head held high and my back erect and look at me with their, who does she think she is? I keep on walking with assurance inside. I'm Black Magic, and I'm Jeanette Redmond's child. Voice is so important, and when you feel placeless, you really don't know. And it was through Jonathan Green's work that I started feeling my grounding. And so I want to share a poem that's also in the essay in the book. So you have to buy the book to get all the other stuff, but I'm just going to hit some of the highlights, okay? So this is a poem that I wrote for Jonathan. I think I have several more poems in me for Jonathan because he really did guide me even without knowing, as he guides so many. But I took mine a little bit more personally because I felt like he loves me better than him. So this poem is written for him. It's called Vision is a Complicated Thing, for Jonathan Green after Lucille Clifton. And it's your Burning Sheets painting inspired that. And I have an epigraph. You know, the one, a picture is worth what?
1,000 words.
Yes, thank you. Capture the image, relish green, and how it deepens the landscape. Verdant may not be your vocabulary, but let it touch you. Expand your palette. Feel the story growing underneath the story. With a careful eye, drink in green. See how it colors everything, even in the cobalt dash of the Atlantic and the crimson drops. Remember, the first layer is always dressing. Celebration is the pressure applied to stop the bleeding. In the background, there's always more. Alabaster streaks that cover the land. Cruelty is at the root. That's why cotton will never just be soft, harmless tufts. That's why the soul sings of the trouble nobody knows. If you let it, the eye will go back to the past. The hands dark, rich, and burnt, forming rays from pearl to midnight. Hands that picked and plowed, but still made time to clap, pray, and praise. Vision is a complicated thing. But those who have sight understand how history blurs the edges. Sit still long enough peer through the veils until it becomes clear how green turns the head to the struggle and the beauty at hand. So the words are really not enough about the relationship that somebody gives you to your own self and your own voice, to see yourself as integral and vital and a sister of South Carolina. And, you know, Jonathan came before and put me on my path, and he just keeps on putting me on my path. And so doing the David Drake way before any of us had a clue who David Drake was. But I will share a couple of poems that I wrote to Jonathan Green's paintings. Are you all okay with that? So I thought I would read a poem that I don't read much, and it's about the thought that David Drake lost his leg. And we don't necessarily know how, but there's a lot of speculation how he lost his leg. And I think there's something wrong with me, because all of the people that I've been writing about lately are people with one leg. Because I don't know how many of you know Clayton Pegleg Bates, the one-legged tap dancer from Fountain Inn, back on Ed Sullivan's show 26 times? I'm writing a book on him. And then I also am a fan of Frida Kahlo, and she also lost her leg. So I hope this is not a forewarning. And not to make light, but I wanted to just write this poem about Dave and that moment, and it's called How I Walk. This leg gone, feel the same way it always do. No matter how I walk, something inside missing. This one leg gone, feel like I always feel. Not having to say when I gets to come and go. About my kin being bought and sold. What of my one leg? I's got a pain I can't tote and a toothache in my heart. I know I be the potter that fires the bottle, but I also be the bottle that can't hold its fire. I bought her pots for a little taste of the moon. In my mind, that'd be an even trade. But I be out of my mind sometime, be exactly where I want to go. In this light, I tells myself, life ain't that bad, but flapping mouths speak contrary, says I drink too much. They might be right, I drinks a little. There's two kinds of moonshine, skied and bottled. I drinks both in, and I love how they both burn. So we know that David Drake wrote in couplets, right? So here's the short poem. Most of my poems are in couplet form. Malika, I know you spied that when you were looking. And so here's a very short poem, a couplet. It's called Irony, a one-legged man who writes in twos. Short poem, Jarring. And in the book you'll see, but they got it a little wrong. The title is Jarring. It's supposed to sit on the poem, and it is a shape poem, like a jar. So the title was supposed to be the lid, right? So, well, you can't have everything. So here we go, Jarring. He of one leg spins pots and chains, right dope deuces like, give me silver or either gold, though dangerous to our soul. On the 27th of July, 1840, a man stuck in red clay, never a runaway except in his mind. In Carolina, he gave his jars plenty of lip. They still run their mouths every which way for day. Thank you very much. So in the poems, I always wanted to have a sense of humor because I felt like Dave had a sense of humor. What I love about what Jonathan did, he he elevated and amplified Dave because he called him Sir Dave.
Yeah.
And what I love about that is that when we're talking about the enslaved population, a lot of times they're flattened. We don't understand human lived lives. They had failings, they had sorrows, they had loves. And this poem that I'm going to do here is called The Deepest Pot. And it's to Jonathan's painting Earth to Earth. And it's at a cemetery, and you just see the collection of a teapot, a painting of a picture of a loved one. And, you know, I lived three blocks down from a slave cemetery when I lived in Asheville, North Carolina. And I would see these things and know that the person either couldn't write or they didn't have the means to buy a tombstone. What do you do? How do you mark your time, right? When you don't have anything to give. I remember one thing that really impressed me the most at this enslaved cemetery. It was a rock, and someone had inscribed the name Patience. The person's name was an enslaved person named Patience. Irony too. There's irony all around us. This poem, I'm trying to express the love a loved one has that goes to the gravesite. Deepest pot. I's a maker of pots, bricks, and poetry. But I don't know what to make of this, 'cause you never dead to me. This ground don't know you. This grave can't hold you like I do. Stone and cross marks your spot, but they can't speak. Can't say your name with the heat of my lips. These things here, teacup that your lips touched, pots my hand molded, just be tokens of the love we done built. Death, be a liar and a thief, but can't steal what I be carrying for you. Eyes be your marker, 'cause eyes be the one you mark your time with. Earth be a circle, and my mind's always coming back round to you. I's your witness and your amen. I be the deepest pot holding you. This goodbye ain't gone, 'cause as long as I'm taking in air, your memory got plenty of breath.
Thank you, Glenis. Jonathan?
Oh, tough act to follow, but let me say
Indeed.
this. I would love to continue painting the way she writes and speaks of her poems. It gives me such energy and enthusiasm sitting here listening to Glenis, forgetting most of our history together because we are so involved. We are texting partners, and so we text back and forth. But most people would know that if you have any interest in me as a person, I'm going to find some work for you to do. There's just too much to do. And when I was first asked by the University of South Carolina, McKissick Museum, Jill Coverman, to, people in museums and universities, they really don't know how to deal with artists. So I was asked to do a picture that could be used on the cover of her book on Dave the Potter. I've never done a picture. I've always worked in series. And if I take on a project, it's not for the money, it's for what I can do with it, because the money will live on. It will live on through the sales of the painting. It will live on through the licensing of using the images. It'll live on in posters and note cards forever. So I'm very careful about what I select, and I read as much as I possibly can. I'm a problematic reader in that I am dyslexic, and I have a side of autism. So I read taught to me by my grandmother with my index fingers. And so in order to engross myself into a project, it has to be something that I'm seriously interested in. So when Jill Coverman asked me to do this project, I didn't tell her I was going to paint a series of works, but that's how Sir Dave struck my imagination. It just went as if I was on some hallucinogenics. The thought of this man in this time, the 1800s, early 1800s, having this ability to, first he was a typesetter. The family that first had control of him were a newspaper family, and it was through the marriage of the daughter that he became involved in the potting culture as a potter. So that's very interesting dynamics there, if you will, especially when it was illegal for a person of color to write and to read and to do a whole lot of things except to work. So the fact that this man had such a relationship with the two controllers of his life, that he took the seriousness of his, as most people from my neck of the woods would say, God-given talent, to not only make pots, but to make enormous pots, and also to inscribe the pots. So you have two white families that gave him permission to do both things. And I only say this because we really do not understand slavery very well. To be enslaved as a person that has a talent and that has a sense of self, it's a very different situation. And if it wasn't that way, these things could never happen. I was very fortunate with one of my mentors, Carol Green Jr., who gave me a Sir Dave drinking pot, if you will, as a gift. He said, "This, you need to have this." And so whatever I take on and do, it becomes, and I don't want to use this word flippantly, it's a very serious spiritual process for me. Knowing that I've been given this talent and that I have been nurtured all of my life by my grandmother and mother and church members, families. I didn't go off to become an artist. I think I went off to become a shaman for the arts, to put on those walls memory and reflections of a people that did not have voices on museum walls. So I was very fortunate to have been a student at School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where I immersed myself every day into the school, into the museum. I worked as a security guard. My glorious partner, Richard Wheatman, of 46 years now we're celebrating, said to me, "Focus on your art. Remove yourself from these jobs and just do your art. I can take care of you properly." And that's what it takes as an artist. These things just doesn't happen out of magic. It takes the support of people, my collectors, my friends, that are always there seemingly to encourage me, even when I can't imagine too many paintings I've done that people seemingly did not admire. But I would like to talk about that painting, Burning of Sheets, because I want to get it very clear as to what that was about. I was born via midwife. And when I grew to be probably between 6 and 8, my job was to prepare the fire with kindles of wood for the burning of sheets when a woman would have a child. And that was sort of a ceremonial presentation of taking the wet, blood-stained sheets and burning them, and the elder women would stand around the burning of these sheets to give homage to their African ancestors, to say, another generation of us is here. That's what Burning of the Sheets has been about. With Dave, I wanted to sort of chronicle his early years of being in a family setting amongst people that loved him, through his trials and tribulations and having been removed from one part of South Carolina to the other. And then to celebrate his demise, which would be the last painting, Pots for to Carry You Home. And in that, it is a painting of several pots, and it's a very large painting. But the two blackbirds, which are crows, are the birds that are directing the spirits back to Africa. So this is sort of the how I take on my projects. And I'm pretty much a nocturnal person. It's hard to get out of that even with hypertension. But I have learned to sleep later rather than going to bed at 3 and getting up at 6. And being an artist, living in a self-contained world day in and day out, I rely on the greatness of my friends and my collaborators to keep me in tune. Thank you.
So it is my suspicion that the audience is teeming with questions, but I have my own first, so you'll have to wait your turn. So first and foremost, and I mentioned this to Glenis and Jonathan when we were in the green room, when I first opened this book, and so now you know with certainty, if you have not already purchased it, that you must, what am I supposed to be taking away? How am I supposed to be looking at this book? Which it may seem like sort of an odd question because usually you're reading books, but here we have this conversation between the visual and the written word. And as I moved through it, and this is how I begin a book, I scan it from cover to cover first, and then I go back to the table of contents, and then I begin the journey. It's probably the museum nerd in me, maybe the former lawyer that must be thorough in her approach. But it became very clear that this was, first and foremost, an homage to David Drake, to Dave the Potter, to Sir Dave, but also this incredible collaboration. So I want to start with that question, and then I'm going to come to a question that really centers Sir Dave and was inspired by the foreword. So I get to Roman numeral 11, and already I have questions. But I'm struck by the organic and seemingly serendipitous origin of this collaboration. And Glenis, you sort of spoke to your personal origin story, and there was a question I had about it. Maybe we'll have a chance to come back to it, maybe we won't. But I also noticed and noted, and Gabrielle, who is very prominently featured, wasn't able to be with us in person, also notes this in one of her essays, that all of the primary collaborators in this instance are African American, and in many instances are from the Low Country. And so in museum space, we often refer to that when it comes to museums as first voice museums, right? So you're speaking to a specific community of interest or about a specific community of interest through the lens of that community, or vocalized by individuals who are living or who have lived or who are informed descendants of that community. And so I'm just curious about the value you think that uniquely brings to a project like this. And I think I already mentioned that my questions are already two-part, so I'm going to start with my first part with respect to that unique value.
Well, I think place is everything, and people will just talk to me and said, "Oh, I love how you honor your family and African Americans in South Carolina. You have such a strong sense of place." But I don't. I'm an Air Force brat. To go to the archives to get my lineage, it's pretty silent. So I have to find what exists versus what doesn't exist. And as a creative and a highly sensitive person, stand in that place, not necessarily as a shaman, but somewhat an empath, to go, what happened before? What happened on this ground? And I just really, for a long time, was very upset, as an Air Force kid, because I'm the only one of the 5 born in South Carolina. My brother before me was born in Évreux, France. And you know how that goes. Where were you born? Auvergne, France. Where were you born? Sumter, South Carolina. It did not have the ring, you know? But the joke really was on me, because when I started following my thread of my voice, I realized that all the roads led to South Carolina. And being in Charleston, it's hard for me to even do a poem here. It's hard to me to speak here. The ancestral presence here is so palpable. And of course, I say that this project with having David Drake from Edgeville and the Columbia area, and Jonathan Green from the Low Country, and Glenis Redmond from the Upstate now we're unearthing. I mean, David Drake never needed me. I needed him. I need Jonathan. That collaboration, this place-based collaboration, and it's not just for us. It's for the future that's coming after us. It's for young people. I mean, what would have happened to me if I knew about David Drake in the 4th grade?
Wow.
A literate man who was enslaved. That would have shifted me on my axis. Yeah. So I think this collaboration, this play space wasn't necessarily by pragmatic design. It was by a spiritual design.
Thank you.
Wow, well, I could say me too, but I think I go a little further. When you are of maritime culture, you never think of a specific place, because there's always a sort of a movement all around you all the time. And in the Low Country of South Carolina, particularly where I'm from, we were well versed on our history and our connection to West Africa. We knew what we did, we knew why we were here, we knew why we were let go out of, because the elders talk about these things all the time. So for me, it's not so much about a place. I know that's inherent. It's about where it's going and the audience that's going to receive it, because then that audience makes my little place of Gardens Corner so much more powerful.
Do you see why I'm so rooted to him? I mean, because I was aimless. I did not have that conversation of elders. So I just linked on to his work and who he is, his sense of place. And it's even leading into my next work, which will be called Port Cities. And it's telling the journey of my ancestors from the Low Country, the 215 miles to the Upstate, the second Middle Passage. How did that happen?
Sure.
So that's part. So place is so important. So you guys will see me more in this area, because I'm looking for a residency so I can be here part of the time to write here and then be there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because I call it history hidden in plain sight.
And it is.
It's all around, but I never heard it. So that's my work, is so that 215 miles, I want to take that trek.
It's really interesting that you say that. It sort of kind of brings me to my next question, but I will just note that's a conversation within the context of our Center for Family History. So I serve as a member of the team for the International African American Museum, or the IAM, and within the context of that work, I helm our programmatic pillars, and one of them is our Center for Family History, and we often talk in genealogy about both the myth and reality of the brick wall of 1870, which is, of course, when recently emancipated, newly minted African Americans appear in mass in the US Census. And it's, of course, where we also discover the name David Drake when he finally is able to name himself.
Right.
And it's this notion of what's hidden in plain sight. So the reality that it can be incredibly difficult for African American families to link to that history beyond that moment, but the myth in that it really is there. The records are there, the history cited and identified are there. And that brings me to this idea of David Drake as a man really establishing himself in these inscriptions. And in the foreword, so again, I hadn't even gotten to the introduction yet. I was stopped at the first page of the foreword, where Kwame Doss writes, "Yet Dave the Potter stands out because by signing his work, he was waging a quiet attack on the far-reaching implications of ownership that defined slavery. He was saying, 'I made this,' which was psychically akin to saying, 'I own this.' And more grandly, he was saying, 'Remember me.'" So, again, before I could make my way into the book, those words hit me just very directly, like a lightning strike. And so I'm just really curious, and I'd love for you all to talk to me and to talk to us about memory as resistance and affirmation in the Black arts experience. What does remembering David Drake mean to you?
Well, I always ask people, take the word remember itself. And, what is the opposite of remember?
To forget.
And that's what most people say, but the opposite of remember is to dismember. So the act of remembering is an active act. When we are creating, we are remembering something that has been dismembered. And I see it as our lineage that has been dismembered. And so when I write, I say that I'm saving my life with my writing because I'm remembering, I'm bringing it into being. And I do feel David Drake, I did not write in a male's voice until my father died in 2003. And I started writing in the voice of my great-grandfather, but that was all preparing me to write in the voice of David Drake.
Indeed.
Do you guys notice when I read the David poems that my voice changes, my demeanor changes? I am not Glenis Redmond at that moment. I'm Dave. And last night, my brother who lives in New Zealand, we were on Zoom call, and he's like, "Just read me one poem." And this is why he's my favorite brother. And I read him one of the poems, and he said, "Oh my gosh, how do you do that? You just disappear." And that is the point. That's what memory means to me. It means to bring it to life, but it also is an act of resistance. It is bringing myself into life. I need David Drake like I need air. I need Jonathan Green like I need air. And when our history is being erased at this present moment, this is our oxygen. We must read. We must know who we are. And I take that act very seriously.
Yes.
And Dave is very upset that I'm not still writing poems about him. He is like, "How could you move on to Peg Leg Bates?" I said, "I will be back. I will be back."
Memory. Well, as an artist, my studies at the Art Institute of Chicago was in drawing. That was my major, figure drawing to be exact. And in order to draw the figure, you have to rely on memory. In order to be a storyteller, you have to rely on memory. So memory is an active part of my existence, remembering all the parts of the body, how it works in tandem with the landscape, with clothing on it, without looking at photographs. And reading is my resource. From reading, I remember. I remember every aspect of the place, the situation, the movement, the smell, the wind blowing on the Atlantic Ocean. Everything moves. People always ask, why is it that everything is moving in your painting? Well, that's memory. I can never remember a day that the fabric wasn't moving on my mother's dress, my grandmother's dress, or a ribbon in the hair or something. It's always movement. My entire body of work is related to and focused on memory.
Thank you for that. So I know the time approaches where I have to hand these two incredibly capable conversationalists over to you for questions, but I've got a couple more. So there are so many beautiful note strokes and lines in this collaboration, and we can see that evidenced here. That really, I could keep talking and be very, very selfish, but I promise you I will not. But I want to draw attention to this particular coupling, if you will, in the book. Your painting, Jonathan Edgefield, and your poem, Glenis, Field Cotton, because they stood out to me as one, Edgefield, and for anyone that isn't familiar with the painting, it's this landscape of a cotton field, and it's sort of the only pure landscape, if you will. No human figure, no pots, which come across as a character, sort of animated in its own way over the course of the series. And I'm curious as to what sort of compelled you and called you, of all the things that you could have painted, sans these other elements that are so central, that you would choose a cotton field. And then to you, Glenis, you, of course, have already read a few of the poems, and you will have noticed that for the overwhelming majority of them, they're written in the first person, right? Again, they're written in Sir Dave's voice. However, in Field Cotton, you are not.
Right.
There's this multi-vocalization that's happening, this collective vocalization that's happening in that piece. And there's one really powerful line that you would read a lot better, so I quit. I'm not going to read it, but I'm just really curious as to what compelled that sort of response and that shift in vocalization, and what compelled the one landscape to be that of a cotton field.
Well, since I'm older, let me go first so I can remember. First, I want to say I am really moved with Malika, because there are sounds up here on this stage that you all are not privy to. Whenever Glenis is reading, she's going, oh. Whenever something is said, that she goes, how wonderful is that? Because it's a sense of joy and enjoyment. The cotton fields for me.
It's the natural call and response.
Right.
Natural call response.
Yes, it is.
So when I lived in Naples, Florida for 25 years, whenever I would drive home, I always drove home using the blue roads. Most of you know what the blue roads are, right? Get off of the interstate expressway and get on the back roads. Because I wanted to see how people lived and what they did every day, and I wanted to see their backyards, their front yards, and try and look at the house and see the colors it's painted and whatever little designs they would use to improve their homes and the differences of their homes. When I was undertaking Sir Dave, I wanted to really see what the landscape was like, and the landscape is a proliferation of cotton fields. That's all you see for miles and miles. And there's nothing more beautiful than the harvesting, right around the harvesting time of cotton, and a beautiful blue sky. It is just striking. And I knew that he must have seen a lot of cotton fields. And that was my closest, using the word memory, of remembering what it would be like looking at a cotton field, regardless of time, regardless of the year, regardless of what was happening in the life of Dave, what is happening in my life at the moment of seeing. I felt a true connection in those cotton fields.
Thank you.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, again, Air Force Brad, I hadn't seen a cotton field, but I knew my mama had picked 250 pounds of cotton a day. I knew my grandmother had picked 350 pounds of cotton a day. And my mother would tell me those stories, And so I had a primary source when I wrote this poem. I mean, because I did look at it, I said, this is beautiful. And I do think cotton is beautiful. But when the form that you have as a poet, I'm responding ekphrastically. I'm looking at a piece of art and being inspired by the art, but then let it take me wherever it is. And no, you're right. This field is not populated, but to me, it is populated with people. There is a collective here. I see human forms. There's no way for me to see this cotton field without seeing the people who pick the cotton. And I went to Erskine College, and that was my first time seeing a cotton field when I was driving. Everybody know Erskine? Due west of what? And I was driving, and I stopped, and I saw a cotton field, and I got out. I was just like amazed, and I picked one piece. I did not really understand at that moment as a youngster what that piece of cotton meant, but I knew it had history behind it.
Indeed.
And that's why the voice, that's why the shift. It becomes a collective, it becomes a we. And I felt that piece of cotton, and my grandmother lived in Lawrence, and my grandmother lived to be 109 years old.
Wow.
So we had her a long time, but I would go to Erskine, be the first in my family to graduate from college.
Here, here.
But I knew my grandmother with a 3rd grade education was the wisest person I knew. So that piece of cotton, I said what I had to cross over to get to Erskine was more than the 55 miles from my house. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Emotionally, the miles. So there was no way I could not see the beauty and the hardship in this and the people in the cotton field.
Thank you.
You have
Thank
great
you both.
questions, by the way.
Amazing.
Well, with that, if I asked another question, I really would be stealing y'all's time. So we're going to open it up to the floor. Thank you so much, Jonathan and Glenis, for sharing and for having me.
Thank you.
So I see a
Right in the middle.
question, right?
down
Yes,
here.
yes.
Who has a mic? You have a mic down front, down front.
Yes.
She said, wait, baby.
Oh. And
If you, right in the 3rd row.
Right there.
Yes, ma'am.
yes, and when you're asking a question, could you stand up so they'll see you?
Yeah.
Ms. Pryor-Martin mentioned earlier the inscriptions that Mr. Drake had put on his pots. Could you expand on that a little bit more about the inscriptions, please?
He wrote in couplets, and they're not all in couplets, but for the majority of them, he wrote in couplets. And he wrote, you could probably speak more in depth about it, but he wrote with a tool. We don't know if that was a stick or whatever, but so you can feel the engraved aspect of it. And I witnessed my first day pot at the Greenville County Museum of Art. I had been writing about him, but I had never seen a pot except for Jonathan's work or a photograph of the pots. And I think I saw the 1857 pot that, that's now traveling, but owned by GCMA. And it's the couplet that still, literally the curator said, come in, I have something to show you. I looked at this pot, I broke into tears. And the couplet is, I wonder where is all my relations, friendship to all in every nation. Those couplets that he did, some of them have humor, some of them, to me, that is just, that missive right there, though, is subversive and beautiful and unifying and a call and response to the individual and to the collective beyond time. So he was not only inscribing couplets, he also put his name on pots, and he did it large. So what does that mean? With the date. And Gabrielle, who was the editor of this book, would talk more about this, but those couplets mean everything. The fact that they're there for us, they're missives, like I said, beyond time, but to the reader and where he was at any moment.
Sure.
And the messages are very emphatic. His name is very purposeful.
Right.
His writing skills at that time were phenomenal. And to have that done on a pot
Yes.
with an object
Dimension.
in clay,
Dimension.
it's not an easy thing to do. Signing a painting is not an easy thing to do with a paintbrush. So if you can imagine this man who was not allowed to write, signing his pot, and he even wrote verses on the pot, relating it to religious context on the pot, poems to the pot. One of his
Romance.
most
Romance.
Kiss the
Yeah.
girl.
I made this
On the
jar
verge.
in big, bold writings. I made this jar. Signed, Dave Miles. It's incredible. And the year, dates, everything.
I think I equate him and Gabrielle writes more about it too, but he has dots and dashes and different things that he's an Emily Dickinson, you know? There are codes there. I think there's more to sit and discover with just the couplets themselves, you know? There's humor, there's romance, there's everything in there. He was a deep thinker. It shows, he himself is showing that the enslaved person is not a flattened person, but a whole human being.
Absolutely.
Through those couplets.
Incredibly dynamic.
Great question.
Okay, so
I think
I'm a little like an auctioneer, so if I see a hand go up.
Hi, thank you. This was a beautiful session. Thank you so much for all of the thoughts on memory and what it means to be an artist in this day and age. I had the good fortune of seeing some of Dave the Potter's work at the touring exhibit at the MFA in Boston back in May. And one of the couplets that Dave writes is, I made this jar equals for cash, dash, though it's called equals lucre trash, Dave. I was giving those marks just to show that there's all this punctuation. But to reread it, it would be, I made this jar for cash, though it's called lucre trash. He seems to be saying something about, I am coerced into making this, but I will still proclaim my humanity, and I will not let myself be I will not let my art be controlled by the money and the coercion that's behind it. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about what it means to be an artist in this day and age, and responsible to memory work and long traditions of Black liberation, while also remaining free from some of the pressures of the market that we're also seeing.
That's a big question.
I think that's a theme. The lucre trash is a theme in his couplets throughout, because there's one, you know, we're given silver or gold, though dangerous for our soul. Like he really positions himself to not try to sully who he is as an artist. But here's the irony, you know, he's being sold. You know, he's he's property. And then he's got to make property to be sold. Like, it's just all the irony. The market is a hard thing. I mean, I left the counseling field in the 90s, and, you know, first generation college student, right, in my family, and I was working on a PhD in counseling psych when I decided, when I was going down Monument Avenue, that literally I was on the wrong avenue. Yes, literally and metaphorically. And, you know, it took a jump, it took a leap to go to my parents, call them and say, I'm no longer doing my PhD. My mother was like, what? And she said, what do you want to do? And I said, poetry. Glenis has lost her mind. And we laugh and whatever, but just think about that. I had lost my mind, y'all. I had lost my mind. But I had started to live in my heart and to live unapologetically in my heart. I left, you don't have to leave a marriage to become an artist, but I did. I left a marriage, I had twin girls, and I decided I am going to be a full-time poet? Who does that?
Glenis.
Who
artist?
does that? And I was in my 30s, and I'd never thought myself courageous or anything, but I just didn't, I never thought about it. I took a leap off the mountain, and guess what? Every time I took a step, there was ground that came up to meet me. And I found, so I never felt, then like, oh, you know, but then, so how did I actually start to make it? How do you have to feed your children. You have to keep your lights on. When we divorced, I went without health insurance for 8 years. I have chronic illness. But here I am in 1999 when the Ku Klux Klan marches in Asheville. They said, let's do a unity rally. Instead of protesting, let artists and all the community leaders come together. And we came together, and that is when a booking agent was in the audience. And they booked me and signed me the very next day. So when people say, how did you get your start as a national touring poet? I say the Ku Klux Klan.
That's a great story.
Thank you so much.
I haven't answered my question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm going to make it quick. Being an artist, I think the most important thing is to finding good partnership for your life. If you can do that, then that's half the battle.
That's beautiful.
Thanks so much, Glenis, Jonathan, and Malika. I hope everyone enjoyed this presentation as much as I did.
Thank you, Glenis.
Do not forget that there will be books signed in the back. Glenis, you will greet everyone. And thank you so much. We'll see you at the next session.